Hi, this is Laura Forehand from the Desert Sanctuary podcast. As we have authentic discussions about deconstruction and religious trauma, please be aware that some episodes may contain stories of sexual abuse and or suicide. Please take care of your mental health. We love you. Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary with Carl and Laura Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion or simply want to ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to invite you to join our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that would resonate with and challenge us and our fellow seekers here in the desert.
We believe that a key to the journey is to keep asking good questions, and we believe that all stories are sacred.
Our hope is that you will find life and healing for your body and mind, and that you will be able to be where you are and be who you are.
And now, here is our show.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. We're still here with Bob Miner, and Bob has been with us before, but also publicly thank him for doing that, bringing his wisdom and ability to tell a story and explain things, gathered from more than 30 years of teaching and work that he's done. So I'm very thankful that he's here.
It's an honor that you asked, Carl.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm honored.
Winston, the wander dog, thinks the same thing. He's down there on the floor, just biding his time till his mom gets here. So here we go. We've been talking about the addiction of the church, and Bob is using that addiction model, which we've started talking about in the last part, about how there are enablers and 7 questions to ask enablers to help them start thinking about what's going on. For me, it really resonates in that I look at, well, how was I responding as a church member? How was I also responding as a church leader? And how does that relate to God and things that we tend to believe in, but it doesn't seem very functional most of the time. So we've been covering these first 4 questions. And Bob, if you'd like to maybe quickly review those and then tell us what number 5 is.
I like the word you use, functional, by the way. That's a very good word in addictions. Mm-hmm. People talk about functional addicts and things like that.
Right.
Anyway, so the first question was, am I dependent on the addict for something, some feeling, some approval, some security? And I need to know what that is. I need to be clear about that and make sure I'm not codependent. Mm-hmm. The second one is, do I need to be nice and pleasing? Am I afraid of something, the anger of the addicts and so on? And the concept that nice, in this sense, is different than being kind, compassionate, good, or honest. Not the difference between being mean or nice. It's about, I got to be real nice. And you might call that Midwest nice, as we talked about, or whatever nice, yeah. Have I been told, for example, the Christian thing to do is to be nice? Third, do I make excuses for the addict? Do I cover up? Do I try to explain it away, maybe, clean up after their messes and so on? And fourth was, do I believe that their addiction is somehow my fault? As if I can control this, if I had responsibility for this. What did I do wrong? What am I doing wrong? If I were just better, if I were more loving, if I were more patient, if I just tried harder. And think of how the church gives you that message.
Yeah.
If you just prayed more. Mm-hmm. If you just had more faith,
right?
God can do everything.
Yeah,
you have the faith. You have the faith. I mean, just think about that. It's in there. In other words, it's turning it about me. I'm the feder to this. When addiction specialists know that's just not. That is enabling.
Yeah.
And so those are the 4 we talked.
Opposed to being functional, as we said, it becomes dysfunctional.
Yes.
Puts the dysfunctional people in charge of the relationship, of how we do day to day. And so number 5, signs of an enabler, questions to ask yourself. Number 5.
And this is, again, do I spend a lot of time trying to understand or explain to myself the addiction? As if understanding them will change them or their activity. Am I looking, for example, for logic in the attic? This isn't about logic, but again, am I looking for the logic of it? And it's very easy to get caught up in what if I just understand this and it's a waste of time.
Mm.
And it gets us off the topic, which is to try to make sure that we are responsible for our views and the addict takes responsibility for theirs.
Mm.
So I just think sometimes, and I think a lot of times we do this because in our past lives, I mean, in our life past,
Yeah.
um, if we didn't understand something, it could hurt us.
Mm.
And so I think this tells us about ourselves. As a child, we didn't understand something, and so maybe we were punished for it.
Mm.
It was just lack of understanding.
Mm.
So I think it kind of, okay, that's our issue. That's my issue. That's something I have to look at. I know I have to look at that. Gosh, I'm a professor. I'm supposed to understand everything. I'm not supposed to say, I don't know. You know?
Right.
Or there are too many options or something like that.
Even though the best scientists in the world say that, they say to some things, I don't know. That's why we're still studying it. That's why we're still in this. Right. Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
And that's for someone like a historian of religion like me. I don't know. And there's a lot of things. There's more things I don't know than things I know, obviously.
Right. Right.
And someone might know, but I don't know.
Yeah.
So I think that gets us caught up in something that isn't about what the addiction is doing. Because again, this is how you use religion, which is covering up one's own personal issues.
Mm.
And so maybe enabling can become an addiction. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, because I don't have to deal with my issues then. I can focus all my stuff on the addict. Anyway, so that's number 5. Number 6, do I know that my responsibility is to save myself, my family, and my community? My responsibility is not to save the addict.
Mm.
My responsibility is to do that. And that means, can I let the addict go? Can I let the addict, what addiction people call hit bottom?
Yeah.
Which is never pretty.
Mm.
And which will bring all kinds of issues up in my life that I need to deal with myself, like, well, what if that happened to me?
Yeah.
And so on. So am I doing for myself, for my family, and what I define as my community, the community I've chosen, what gets me out from under the addict when the addict falls? And because if a family has an addict in them, the addict, 1, becomes the center of attention, and 2, it destroys the family dynamics.
Mm.
And every single other person in that family is now unhealthy in a way because they had to grow up with an addict. That's kind of the model I'm thinking of. And this is why many addiction counselors want to see the whole family. They don't want to see the addict alone. They want to see the whole family because there's a family dynamic, family system theory, they used to call that, I think.
Yeah.
And so that's what I say. Do I know that my responsibility is to save myself, my family, my community, the people I love? And, that falls into politics. That falls into a lot of things. Do I want the addicts running my country? Do I want, no, you know what I mean? It's like, it's bigger, and it depends how we define our community.
Yeah.
Because we are creating a community somewhere. We need a community that supports recovery.
Do you think there's something in all of us that wants to be that hero? I mean, I say that as a pastor for 20 years, going to funerals and having people say things to the person that's hurting that doesn't help at all. That's not good advice and not something you need to say to them. But it's almost like I want to be the one when our family falls apart that rescues that person. I want to be the one that was there for them or gave them the perfect advice. In other words, there's something in our ego or something that says, I want to be the one. I want to save them.
Yes. I used to do an annual down the road in Kansas City is Unity Village. And all the Unity churches, pastors had to go through their seminary there. And for a while, they invited two of us, I was one of them, to give a series of seminars for each class. So for about 7 years, I got to know every minister that was going to be in Unity. One of the things when we're talking about stuff like this and gender issues and sexual orientation issues, I had to say now, you are probably in this profession because you need to fix people. That's a need. You probably self-chose this profession, not consciously, because you needed to be the one that gave the answers.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it's no wonder. And that's not just pastors. I mean, that's all kinds of things. I need to be a rescuer. I need to be the one that has the answers. And part of that is the difficulty of watching someone you don't have the answers for. And how hard that is, because what if that were me? There again, that's what if that were me? I have had to tell my own family when they're talking about someone, we do not have the tools to fix this person. We do not have the tools. It would require all kinds of therapeutic intervention we don't have. So you've got to stop trying to say, how can I fix this? We don't have the tools. And I know friends, I just talked with one before, who have to fix everybody. And so they pick up these causes that are, this is not a pastor, they pick up these people who are causes and they become the sort of thing they do. But it's not a bad thing that someone goes into the ministry because they care, because they want to help people. That's a good thing. But when it moves into the ego thing, I think you used the word, the ego thing where my ego depends on how well I fix you. Then we're dealing with our issue, right? Now we've got our, okay, no wonder I'm an enabler. You know what I mean? So yes, I think that's a good.
So you're also limiting the resources that can come to that person, because it's got to come to me, or at least through me, right? And I most definitely got into ministry because of that, because of my lifelong thing to kind of understand people and what they need and what would make them better. And I want to be part of that. In fact, I would love to be the guy that they said, well, thanks to Carl, right? And in your family, I think you fall into those kind of things too, that there's some kind of basic need there that gets kind of out of whack, right?
And I'm not saying, I'm agreeing with you on this, I'm not saying any of those things are bad reasons, but you're right. It gets to be, now it becomes something about my need as opposed to my want. I want you to love me because you choose to love me, not because you need to love me.
Right.
And so that's the out of whack thing you're talking about, I think. And again, that's where we're examining ourselves.
Yeah. I could say I've seen that inside of families. Just a lot of the women I know in my life are trying to promote this idea that give young women some autonomy. And so you, Uncle so-and-so, don't just come pick up my daughter or my granddaughter unless you ask, right? But it's that kind of feeling in that person that says, well, they've got to like me. I got to be the favorite uncle, and I can't, because both of my granddaughters for a while wouldn't hug me or get close to me. And their mother allowed them to have that autonomy to just say, if you don't want to, you don't have to. Papa doesn't have to give you a hug. and they didn't put any kind of pressure on them at all until they decided, I know hugs would be good for them and good for me,
Yeah.
and I don't have any bad intentions and so on. So, but at the same time, it can't wreck me just because I'm not the favorite, or I didn't provide
Yeah.
the winning solution or the great advice or the whatever home run you have in your mind that,
Mhm.
right? Because that enables people, right?
Right.
It enables them sometimes to have bad behavior.
Oh, I'm a grandfather too. I only have one grandson,
Yeah,
and I don't like it when people, and I'm a hugger.
yeah,
In fact, I've taught my whole family to hug.
yeah,
Everybody expects to hug me. They expect to hug me. And I've taught my whole family to say, I love you as one of the last things we say when we leave. Not love you, but I love you. I taught my mother to say that to me. I
yeah,
taught my brother to say to me. Now it's just automatic. My grandson will say, I love you, Grandpa, and stuff like that. But I understand. Part of me is, I understand that there's nothing wrong with a child being shy. There's nothing wrong with a child making those kind of decisions. I mean, we sometimes teach children, don't talk to strangers,
Hmm.
and then a mother will, if a child does it, and I meet someone and, I could grandparent the whole universe as far as I'm concerned. I love it. I didn't expect it, but I love it. But if some parent tries to force the kid on me, I back away. I don't know. No. This is fine. For me, now my grandson is 14. I used to see him almost every week from the time he was born. I would have a day with him, something like that. Well, he's 14 years old. What do 14 teenagers do? They want to be with them. They don't want to be with grandpa anymore.
mhm,
In a sense, that's the same thing. Now, does he love his grandpa? Oh, I know he does. Does he know his grandpa will be there as fast as he can? He said one time, Grandpa, you never run. I said, no, I don't at my age. But if you're in trouble, I'd run.
yeah,
But it's sort of the same thing. I miss the days when Grandpa was his hero. So I'm not going to force that, but he will not leave without giving me a hug and saying, I love you, Grandpa. And he says it first. I don't even have to say it.
yeah,
So I have a sense of that.
right,
But you're right. It's about their autonomy and their decisions. And it gets bigger as it gets more important as they get to be teenagers and older.
yeah,
But I still miss the days when Grandpa was his hero, and he'd stand at the door waiting for Grandpa to come.
yeah.
I
Absolutely.
can't say, yeah.
That's our dream that has always been there.
I think I needed that more than he did.
Yeah. But when we need to be the answer, when we need to be the favorite, when we need to save that person, like I think we said before, we just cut off all the other resources
Yeah.
to them, and they're not getting from the rest of the world what they should. And again, it's a codependency, right? We're
Yeah.
dependent on each other for those things, uh, not open to the rest of the world. Well, what about number 7? We're finally there.
This is the big one. We've touched on it before, but here it is.
Okay.
How is my enabling really about my own issues? I've been touching on this all the way along.
Yeah.
How would I feel if I hit bottom at something?
Mm.
I don't want to feel bad like that. But I don't want them to feel that bad.
Mm.
But will people accuse me of being as bad as the addict? I'm always for every encounter is a learning experience, and it's a learning about myself.
Mm.
So all the mistakes I make, all the times I actually do something and it turns out okay or helpful, I'm always learning. I have to always ask, what is this about my issue? And what is this about my need, psychological need to do something? And I use my men's group to talk about how I responded to something and why did I do that? And sometimes I can trace it right back to parenting messages.
Mm.
I had good parenting, but I can do that. So that's but that's my seventh question, which is kind of a summary of all of this. How is my enabling really about my own issues? And
Yeah.
I need to deal with my own issues.
Yeah.
And so I learned. So everything's a learning experience. My grandma used to say, live and learn. And so every mistake, every encounter, I should learn something from it. And again, that's the journey, not the tour.
Yeah. So we don't have time to talk about this question real quick that I'm going to slide in here, but been all along, as you just mentioned, we've been kind of pointing towards that fact that we're avoiding the main issues, the real deal, the main thing. The main thing is not evangelism. The main thing is healing. And
Yep.
The core issue, the thing that's the parts of me that need to integrate, that need to have trauma looked at, and so on. What would be kind of base advice? And we've been talking about not having to be the advice giver, not having to be that hero, but from your experience, it seems like you're convinced, and I am with you, that we got to deal with the main issue. We got to deal with the main thing and find out what our issue is, what our issue or issues are, and deal with that. What's your advice, just in simple terms? How do we get started on that? What's the best moves?
Well, I do think the first thing is go through our own journey. The best psychologist is the one who's also having psychological counseling. And so I think it's where are we on our journey? And the recognition that if I have stuff with somebody else's stuff, that's my stuff. I think that's the most important thing. And I have to realize I'm on that journey. I have to forgive myself. And so that means not do everything perfectly. I'm going to make mistakes. And my identity does not depend on my perfection. Here I am, a religion professor. I should have all the religion professor answers, right? I don't. And it means always focusing on, if that's the case, something like I messages, my story, my viewpoint, my opinion, my interpretation. If I'm talking about the Bible, it's my interpretation of it.
You say for me a lot. For me.
That's right. For me, yes.
Yeah.
And an addict doesn't want to say, this is my interpretation. They want to say, God says, I read it in the Bible. No, this is how you interpret it. Everybody interprets. Stop that.
Yeah.
And so I'm not even going to argue. There's no literalist. They take literally what they want and ignore literally what they don't want.
Yeah.
So it's all, there are different levels with that. Well, I mean, iMessages. It's always about, well, if I read that passage, I wouldn't read it that way. I'd read it this way or something like that. And it also means, I think, a recognition, and this may be too obvious, that we're dealing with something not on a logical level, not on a historical level, but on an emotional level.
Yeah.
And therefore, we need to be available with our feelings. And so I don't have a problem. I don't know if I mentioned this before. I don't have a problem with saying to someone who is disagreeing with me, saying things like, it's the one that comes to mind is someone who is saying they have gay kids, but they can't accept them because the Bible says. There's an example of religion addiction.
Yeah.
And so my answer wouldn't be, oh, but the Bible doesn't. I'm not going to get in that argument because that's the argument that doesn't do it. I'm going to say something like, that must be really hard. I know that if that were my case, if I thought that way, I would have the hardest time. It would tear me up to not be able to accept my children for who they are.
Yeah.
And so so you don't have to have a mean answer instead. You have, it's about an answer that is totally in your story, in your feelings, in your approach, in your. I said, and I might say if I wanted, but depends how far I want to go with this. Depends how where it's going. Uh, they might answer, well, don't you think God's right on this? A lot of people interpret that way. I wouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can just repeat, then jump up and down in the same place. Well, what about this? Well, a lot of people do that, but I don't.
Yeah.
Well, what about this? Well, a lot of people believe that, but I don't. And you just jump up, and you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to have studied the way we did at seminaries and things like that. All you have to do is have your story. I know there are people who agree with you, but I don't at all.
Yeah.
It just doesn't think with me at all. Well, then you're going to hell. Well, I know a lot of people might believe that, but I don't.
Yeah.
And so you can just repeat that over and over and over again. And you're being kind, you're being compassionate, and you're taking responsibility for what you believe. You're not blaming it on anything that could be addictive.
Yeah. The important thing maybe about stating what you think instead of this is what God thinks or the Bible says or our denomination thinks or what we've always believed. You say, this is what I think. But to do that, you have to know who you are and what you care about.
Absolutely, yes.
What you care about and how important it is to say what I'm about to say or not. And so when I am occasionally asked for advice, I would say the most important thing is you've got to get in touch with your nervous system and your body and how it's reacting to things. And you mentioned emotions, which is what I believe the amygdala uses is emotions. It stores things with emotion, and we access it the same way. And so, yeah, it's harder and it's more work, and you have to slow down instead of just making more profit or getting more church members. You really got to slow down and be contemplative and go inside and find those answers for yourself, which will be more authentic in the end, and be able to say with confidence, this is what I think, or for me, like you say, then you can do what you were alluding to just a second ago that I think you want to talk about. Then you can tell your story, right? And it's probably way more effective to tell your story than just argue with people about theology, which in my opinion is ultimately guesses or assumptions. But telling your story, that's important. You alluded to it just briefly. Tell me some more about that.
I think you're right. I think our stories change people because they break through the idea that you're just telling me old stuff. They make it seem like you really believe what you're saying. And this what gets me upset, for example, of some of our politicians who I would like to agree with. And I'm not going to give examples. I'm just going to say, because they won't act like they really believe what they're saying.
Yeah.
They want decorum. That's nice. They want order. They want stuff like that. No, people don't believe that. The people who are watching you, you're not the only one in this conversation, whatever it is. There are people watching how you deal with it. And they want it to sound like you really believe it. That's why I tell people, you got to act like you really believe it. You got to sound like you really believe it. If you do. And that's why linguists like George Lakoff, who wrote Don't Think of an Elephant and The Political Mind, will talk about you speak from your values. And so that's where it has to come from. That's what does, you're right, that's what does the change. Now, will it change that person today? My goal is not to win an argument. My goal is to take my stand, stay where I am, and do the best I can, mistakes and all. But it's not to win an argument. If I get into the idea, I got to win this argument, I am way off anything human. I'm now into the capitalist world of competition.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't know, because, and what I find is you don't know how that will stick, as you said, because it touches feelings. And you won't know after that person leaves you or whatever what they're going to be. It's like a parent taking an alternative stand to society. Well, the kid may grow up the way the kid wants to grow up, but the kid will always remember, my dad didn't believe that. It'll always be there. My mom said, no, she didn't believe that. Even if the child went off and believed it, they'll always remember when a door is opened, it may shut, but it never shuts as locked. It's always a little bit more open. And so what we can do is be a human being standing in front of another human being. And the best thing sometimes we can do is say, I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
You have, in other words, you're saying you have met a human being who has an alternative,
Right.
and believes it. And that, I think, is one of the most important things. Talk about what the church calls a witness.
Yeah.
That's a witness to something real. Anyway, that's my thinking on that.
Yeah. In our new book, we started talking about, well, it's loosely based on, it's called Campfires in the Desert, Deconstruction Guide Story, something like that. But talked in there twice about stories, once about hearing, we talked about hearing survivor stories. What the women tell us more than anything is they want men to listen to their stories, not leadership books, not theology books. They want you to read survivor stories. Also talk in there about telling our story and getting to a point where you can tell your story. Since Laura's not here, I want to make a couple of points, which I'm sure she would say if she was here. She'd say that we consider all the stories as sacred. That when someone shares their story with us, that's a special thing. We want to treasure it and listen and feel it with them and so on. I think she would also.
I like that idea. I like that very much.
She also, I think, would say that you have to earn the right to hear my story. Not everybody gets to hear it. And of course, that's tricky when you put it on a podcast where 10 or 12 people might watch it. It's, there's something about stories and the way that the new book is called Campfires because we gather, essentially what we do is gather around campfires and say, this is the way, this is the way I see it. This is what I experienced in life. And this is what I saw over there. And that's why I'm here. I'm not going to, you don't sit around a campfire and vow to protect the group and save the organization. You're there as equals around a center point, sharing your stories. And we just believe that's sacred. And you did find people you can trust to tell that story. And then
that keeps it sacred.
Yeah. And when you tell your story,
I think of the word sacred
story.
as separate.
Yeah.
You get to choose the holiness, the same thing. You get to choose. Holy means separate from other thing.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people don't deserve an answer to their questions.
Yeah.
They've got to earn it.
Right. Exactly.
And so I think, again, it's easy to forget that we have to give an answer to every question. And no,
Yeah.
well, I agree with that.
The wisdom.
Laura is very wise too.
She is. And I miss her today being here, but I'm glad that you dropped in and shared your wisdom with us. The book we talked about, remind them what the title exactly of that is.
This one, you mean?
Yeah, When Religion is an Addiction by Robert N. as in Nancy. What's your middle name?
Neil.
Robert Neal, N minor, Ph.D. So When Religion is an Addiction. I got to have that book now. I wrote it down over here along with the other one you recommended. So just thanks for coming on. Thanks for spending.
Well, this is a real treat being with you, Carl, again, and tell Laura I miss her.
Yeah.
And but this has been a real treat. Thank you.
Yeah, it really is. Not to overuse my metaphor for my book, but it's like sitting around a campfire and just hearing someone tell their story, share their wisdom, and then move on. Might go to a different campfire next week, but wish you well in all your endeavors. For the listeners out there, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate your friendship. in your devotion. We hope that we're not an addiction for you, but we thank you for sharing the wisdom and occasionally commenting on those kind of things. Thanks for being here. As always, be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary podcast.
Remember, all who wander in the desert are not lost.
We believe all of our stories are sacred.
We are always here if you need someone to hear your story.
Check out our blog on Pathos and also our YouTube channel.
And stay tuned for our Leaning Forward conference.
Remember, we love you.
And be at peace.